Welcome, everybody. I'm very excited to be able to bring to you today Regine Gilbert, who is the author of a book that really impressed me called Inclusive Design for a Digital World, Designing with Accessibility in Mind. Welcome, Regine.
Oh, thank you. I am so happy to be here.
Yeah, I wanted to reach out to you because when I found this book on Apress, I was looking for answers to how to address accessibility concerns in terms of design, particularly for immersive media. And I had not seen a book like this before, and boom, all of a sudden there was something there. And what I really appreciated about this book is how approachable it felt and how of the times it felt. So I tried to find you, and at length I found you by actually replying to a Twitter post you gave about like favorite 80s toys or something. And then I realized, oh, that's the person that wrote the book. So we came to this through interesting pathways. I wanted to just give a quick sort of context to who you are. Regine, from the bio, is a experienced designer and educator at NYU, actually, and an international speaker with years of experience in the technology area. You're at the NYU Tandon School of Engineering and teaching user experience. But I want to also give you the opportunity to introduce yourself as you would like to be known.
Yeah, so I currently am an industry assistant professor in the Integrated Design and Media program at the Tandon School of Engineering, and I teach user experience design generally for the web, and I've also co-created a couple of courses for our Tandon Online, UX for immersive technologies, as well as UX for AR and VR. And I also co-teach assistive technology class called Looking Forward with Gus Chalkias, and we teach students about the assistive technologies that folks with blindness and low vision use.
The low vision challenge is one that we have experienced with our users at this show, and it has in itself so many different permutations. I was talking to my friend in Baltimore the other day who will be at this show, who is blind in one eye now and has 20% vision in the other. And I went through an entire series of questions with her, like, okay, I really want you to be at my show. What's going to be the problem? She said, Discord is really hard. You know, she will memorize the location of a channel so that she can count down to get to the right place. And so moving the channel sequence is a problem. Color differentiation and all of these things. And yet other people have other low vision sort of manifestations. And so each of these subjects in themselves is a very complex, nuanced subject. And the question is, how does somebody like me running a conference even hope to begin to address this?
Yeah, I mean, this is the world we live in, right? Of what do we do and how do we even start? I think that the first thing that we need to think about is, are we providing options? Are we providing options if someone cannot see? Or are we providing options if someone can't hear? Are we providing options if someone may have some mobility challenges? Are we providing options so that folks who may have different cognitive issues, like things shouldn't go too fast, you know, things of that nature? Are we providing options for things, or are we just making them in one way? Because oftentimes what happens is we make things in a way that suits us and then offer no options for anyone else. Mm-hmm. And that's where the exclusion comes in, right? Where we start to exclude people.
The book itself says that, what does inclusive design mean? It means that your product has been created with the intention of being accessible to as many different users as possible. And this is important. For a long time, the concept of accessibility has been limited in terms of only defining physical spaces. However, personal technology now plays a part in the everyday lives of most of us, and it's responsibility for designers of apps, web pages, and public-facing tech products to make them accessible to everyone. And I have now said several times in different forums that what I'd like to see is that there has to be a community effort towards building software development kits that can help developers, whether they're AAA or independents, have the tool sets to be able to implement accessibility tools into their experiences from the outset. That may have to be a crowdsourced effort, but I'd like to give you an opportunity to speak to how that sort of a solution might work.
Yeah, I feel that, one of the things that I have been researching is looking at tools and looking at the inclusion and accessibility of tools specifically related to the XR field, looking at AR and VR and mixed reality. And so many of the tools don't have any sort of accessibility built in. The accessibility that is available is oftentimes plugins that someone has built, typically out of frustration. And it would be so helpful if these companies could start to think about who's using your product, who's using these games, who's playing these games, and think about them as they age. Things are going to change with that individual, right? Regardless of who you are, if you get older, you can't help but have certain things happen. Our eyesight starts to diminish. Our hearing starts to diminish. Our mobility starts to diminish. So keeping that in mind, if you want to really have a product that people are going to use for a long time, why wouldn't you provide those options for folks? And why wouldn't you, bake in those features so that people can create those experiences that are accessible? Because accessibility is options.
Right. For example, Samsung on my Android device has the option to set the hearing equalization for my age from 0 to 18, 18 to 45, 45 to 80. And I guess it has a different curve for those parts of the hearing that start to fall off. So it's not a big deal, but I don't know what I'm missing, I guess, at my age, but I definitely have it set to the upper threshold, but it's an option.
Right.
I guess my point too is, though, it's not just about the physical spaces, but also making sure that experiences can be available to anyone for any reason.
Yeah. Yeah. I agree with that. I think that we have to, Microsoft has this great inclusive design toolkit that will remind folks that disability can be permanent, it could be temporary, or it could be situational, right? Mm-hmm. You could be in a loud bar where your hearing is, you can't hear as well. You might have an ear infection, or you might be deaf. Right. So that's a case of, temporary being in a bar, situational being in a bar, temporary having an ear infection, and then permanent being deaf. So when we think about building with disability in mind, with accessibility in mind, we are making things more inclusive.
What did you attempt to accomplish with this book? Obviously, these things are all moving targets to a degree, and then other things are kind of evergreen. What are the tools that people might discover in this book, or is it more theoretical?
I feel I put things in that were applicable, mostly to the web, but it definitely applies to the XR space. My intent when I was creating the book I was thinking a lot about my students and the questions that my students have asked me over the years, and even the questions that I've had. And I tried to provide answers to those questions in the book.
What are the most common questions that you get?
Well, in chapter 3, titled "If It's Annoying, It's Probably Not Accessible," I actually pulled a bunch of students and friends and asked them, what are the things that you find annoying, when you're on websites? And from what they said, and looking at how those things impact the disability community, if it's annoying, it's nearly impossible for some folks to even accomplish their goals. And so, that's just one of the areas that I looked at where I was like, oh, I want to hear from people what they think, what bothers them, and incorporate that in.
That's such a great point. I have that problem with game design and puzzles. I get to a puzzle and I'm like, I don't know what they're thinking. I don't know what they want me to do. I'm just going to rage quit and never come back to it. And my friend Blair, he's a designer and he's building a very complex VR world. And he just said, there's no puzzles. Like, this game will be 100% puzzle free. Of course, they have their place and they have their own art and everything, but you don't want to make the ability to progress on something a puzzle. And it may be an intentional puzzle or not, but it's not about thinking about the way you think. It's about thinking about it from the outside, how somebody completely different than you, who does not got the same intentions, who doesn't have the same chutzpah to check out your project, has. It should be the lowest possible barrier to entry and reducing friction. Now, that's self-evident. So what can we offer people watching this talk that will be, fresh insight, fresh information?
One of the things that I oftentimes ask, whether I'm speaking to my students or I'm speaking to groups, is who do you think about the most? And if we really think about it, we tend to think about ourselves the most. And so when we're making stuff, we tend to think about ourselves using it. And that's something that we need to stop doing. We need to think about who could possibly use this thing, who could experience this thing, and are we making it equitable for everyone to try and use it? Now, it's impossible to make something for everyone. That's the truth. However, you can get as close as you can get if you try. And I think that what I would like to see is more folks thinking about, if you are a gamer, especially, and you love games and you're probably going to play games for the rest of your life, what does it look like when you are 70 years old and playing games? And is there those options for 70-year-olds to play games, right? Can things be made bigger? Can text be made bigger? Can there be captions, right? There are all these things to consider. So I would say, first and foremost, think about someone other than yourself. And if you really want to get as many people to experience whatever it is you're creating, then you need to think about accessibility and inclusion.
My friend I was talking to also brought up a very interesting point. She said that magnifying something doesn't help, because all it does is, in her eye-brain relationship that's causing the problem, it simply magnifies the problem. So she has to use a 60-inch screen and have things that are very big and very contrasted to be able to piece out what's happening on there. I was playing the new Mass Effect, the game, which has been reworked, and they have the option to have small, medium, and large subtitles. And I typically don't like sitting at my desktop playing my video game because I get sore for playing that long in that position. So I like to sit on my bed or whatever, and I want to be able to see it from at the back of the room. And my eyes are not what they used to be. So having the option that not just does that, but looks good while it does it is another thing. It shouldn't be. Accessibility doesn't have to also be just this sort of ugly, tacked on thing. It can be intrinsic in the design to have its own beauty and its own sort of conceived look, or sound, or whatever the case may be.
I think that we can think differently about the way that we design things. I heard an accessibility advocate asked the question to a group I was watching. I can't remember his name off the top of my head, but he asked the question to the crowd of, when was the last time you saw a beautiful walker, right? A walker that someone uses. And he, people are like, oh, I don't think I've ever seen a beautiful walker. And the question really is, why don't we see beautiful designs for, folks with disabilities, right? Like, why aren't we making things more beautiful? We are so creative. We have so much opportunity, and we don't have to fit into this box of the way that things have always been done. So I think we can make accessibility beautiful. And like you were saying, for you to be able to sit back on your bed and to play, your game and to be able to see everything clearly that's just a beautiful experience.
Yeah.
Right. And we have that opportunity to create that for people. That's a gift to be able to do that.
Another challenge, I was thinking about, the director of Parasite, who said if Americans could get over the 3-inch problem at the bottom of the screen, subtitles, they could enjoy an entire world of beautiful movies. Mm-hmm. And I think about how films could incorporate that into a larger sort of design. But then you get into this challenge of language, right? For example, I could have done this talk by using Google Meet's incredible AI auto captioning and have English baked in, but not everybody speaks English. So then what do I do for my Spanish speakers or my Mandarin speakers or my Farsi speakers or whomever, right? And English is quite universal, but I'm not going to make that assumption. And then it would be difficult to put something over top later. So do I leverage the existing tools? I can say, well, I'll just put out the video and let Google, whoever's using it, just use it. For example, my father has a law firm, and my mom wanted to have a translation tool for the Polish and Ecuadorian clients that they have. And she said, we need to have all the pages in 3 languages. I'm like, Mom, I could just embed a Google translator at the top and they'll know how to do that. It's an interesting question because the translator may not be quite accurate, especially if you're dealing with like legal terms or whatever. So how do you address that problem?
Well, that is a case by case basis, right? You have to think about who your target market is and understanding that they could be diverse. Again, it's impossible to address everyone, but you want to address as many folks as you can. And this gets to you understanding who you're creating this thing for, right? And if you know that the primary, let's say, in the case of your family's business, knowing that a majority of the folks speak these 3 languages, then you can put out that information in that way. So I think it's very individual. There's no blanket answer because it's going to depend on what you can provide and what the needs are for the people who you're serving.
Yeah. There's several consorts that focus on this. WC3 has got a whole initiative around this, and you have an initiative as well, right? There's a group that you help lead.
Yeah. So I'm not a lead. I'm part of the XR Access group, right. And the XR Access group was started at Cornell Tech, and they get they started a symposium almost 3 years ago. And the whole goal of XR Access is to promote accessibility in the XR space. And so this is through policy, through research, through development, inclusive design. So there's so many areas. And there's actually a symposium happening June 10th and 11th of 2021, where different panels will discuss various areas from development to inclusive design to policy. And it's a wonderful group that anyone can be part of. And I encourage folks, if you are a designer or you're a developer or you have interest in changing policy, that you get involved in the XR Access group, because it is imperative for us to get more accessibility incorporated into the XR space.
Yeah, and I want to state this again, with no filter. I think that a lot of the time, the trouble for bringing new people into considerations around accessibility and inclusivity is that they fear that they will do it wrong, that they'll be ostracized, that they'll, step on somebody's work and offend people or whatever the case may be. And we have to sort of help people to know that all of this is best intentioned, that nobody is out to kill anybody or hurt anybody or crucify anybody. It's about coming together and solving an issue that all of us want to address. I think that the deeper I have gone and learned about addressing inclusivity and accessibility around design and project organization and production, the richer my projects have become. They've become better. They've become more useful to everybody at every level. So if it's a lens that you need to look through in order to improve your design work, then so be it. And I appreciate that you've made a door for people to start to explore that.
Yeah, and there's other folks who are doing wonderful things in this space too. My friend Thomas Logan runs a monthly meetup called A11Y, which A11Y is a numeronym for accessibility. There's 11 characters between the A and the Y. He has an A11Y VR meetup that meets once a month, and they have a YouTube channel. So if anybody is interested in learning about accessibility in the VR space, it's a great thing to check out. A11Y VR.
Awesome. Thank you for those resources. I mean, that's a great way for people to start and build on top of so much work that's already been done. I was looking just yesterday at some low-hanging possibilities, and I looked up how to use emojis for accessibility. Just that guide, put emojis at the end where possible. Use this type or that type of emoji. Look up those sorts of lists and guides and get feedback from people who actually have the concerns that we're trying to address. Right. Make sure that, it's never about us without us, for sure. But think about, don't make assumptions that the most fundamental things are going to work out. There are basic initial things, and I've said this again, is there's a 5-second loop, a 5-minute loop, and a 5-hour loop. You have to first get the 5-second loop right. How do I onboard? How do I come in? So don't make assumptions that the most basic parts of it are going to work for folks. You want to make sure that the 5-second game loop is in place, if anything. How do I start? Even in my 3D WebXR world, it's fine if I create universal signs that teach you how to locomote and how to talk, but if they're too far away from the starting point, they're not going to do you much good. When people spawn in the world, make sure they don't spawn on top of each other, and that they spawn within range of that signage, and that the signage is universal in scope, but that your assumption of what is universal applies around the world. There are certain hand signs that do not mean the same thing in two different countries. What if you can't see? How are you going to address that problem? Can you address that problem? So it's those initial basic things, the onboarding, the menus. Do you need a controller? Can you do it without a controller? That should be addressed even more so than the long game.
Yeah, there's so many considerations to think about. And even, in the United States, over half of the country does not have high-speed internet, right? So if you're creating this experience, what does that mean from an inclusion perspective if it's very heavy bandwidth needed for it? Or what are options, again, if there isn't great bandwidth? Can I still play this thing? Can I still experience this thing?
Yeah, and part of the Codes of Contact concert that we're a part of, one of the points that came up, I think, from my friend at OCAD University, who, full disclosure, is a sponsor of this show, and we're very grateful, said they had people saying, we don't know how to fill out these forms to apply for these programs where you have these grants and these scholarships. The forms are just too complicated. They're too, how do you simplify that? How do you make a web page accessible just in terms of flow and meaning and not getting lost in complicated terms? I tried to apply for unemployment insurance in California, and I thought, holy hell, like, how do people do this? I mean, there's like 16 pages and all these ID checks. And I was like, I know tech and I have a hard time with this.
Yeah. That's, listen, when it comes to any sort of government thing, I think we all have experienced mass frustration in terms of usability. And yeah, it again, what information do you really need? Do you really need to have all this information, or can you just have the basics for people to fill out so that it's a lot more simple? Yeah. Right? Because a lot of times, depending on what the event is or the thing is, people want the data, right? They want that information. They want that demographic information. But do you need it? And is it making it more complex for the person who's trying to just, they just want to fill out this form and move on?
And they're already probably tired, broke, heartbroken, despondent. Yeah. That does not help in any way.
No.
It could be voter registration. It could be immigration. It's all sorts of like life-changing things that have to be improved upon.
Right.
My friend Amanda Shelby, who's very smart and wise, said, meet people where they are.
Yeah, I think that's a really good. I was actually just thinking that earlier today, because you do need to meet people where they are and not where you are. I think that's an important consideration, because a lot of times, there are times where I'll be talking about accessibility and I'll assume people know, but they don't, right? Or people will assume that I know things that I don't. And you do need to meet people where they are when you're thinking about creation as well.
Yeah, and it doesn't just mean on your terms. It can literally mean some people will never know that your organization, community, support exists if it's on a web page. First of all, why would they ever go there? Maybe they only read newspapers. Maybe they only read magazines or flyers or pamphlets.
Or Reddit.
Or Reddit, who knows where they are. But there might be, you have to also think about are the people that you want to reach even in the circles of technology that you're existing in. If you truly want to onboard brick and mortar shops, mom and pop shops, and teach them how WebXR can be useful to them, you're not going to talk about it on WebXR. You got to go to them, meet them where they are, and say, there's a path towards this. I mean, who did this really well was AOL. They sent you a CD-ROM in the mail and said, I'm going to give you 2 months free to teach you this internet thing with a big chunky interface and a go button and a you've got mail sound.
Right. Well, yeah, someone, I can't remember who, tweeted about why aren't more people into VR or AR? Like, why isn't there more consumer adoption? And what's the reason for there to be? People need a reason.
Yeah. Right.
In order to get into something. And then it needs to be accessible to them. One of the A11Y VR talks was about how 97% of people in the world have never tried VR. Right? 97% of people. And so, there's all this like, ooh, this is the next big thing. Is it?
Well, half of homes in the U.S. have no HD TV yet.
Right. Again, so there's a lot of considerations to think about and really understand. I think that people are in their bubbles and they're, you're in your echo chamber and you hear the same things, but get outside of that and see what's really going on in the world.
So one of the things that's come up in the last couple of years is this idea of creating more accessibility or inclusivity for BIPOC communities, right? So Black and Indigenous people of color. And how does a site that's like put upon to address those communities, do that.
Hire them. I mean, it's that simple. I think that
where will you find all of the people that you wish you could hire if they are not easy to be found?
I think they are. There are so many. I think that the tendency is to go with places we know and not, places we don't. I think that, I remember when I was younger that people would tell me, people hire in their likeness, right? And so if that's the case, if people are hiring in their likeness and they're not a person of color or they're not a woman, are they going to hire those people? I think that, again, it's looking outside of yourself, which is it's a self-awareness thing too, right? Of people to have an understanding that, oh, I keep looking in the same places or I keep looking at the same schools. I mean, there's so many wonderful community colleges out there. There's great HBCUs, historically Black colleges out there. So the people are there. They just need to be met up with, people need to meet them.
I had a really amazing conversation with Charles Babb yesterday, who is a leader in the Black community out of Atlanta. And he said one of the things about Atlanta that's so important is that they allow people who have had a difficult past to still have the same opportunity as anybody else, right? Like somebody who has a prison history or whatever trouble that may have existed as the result of anything, has the opportunity to do great things and to be included and to be hired and to be everything else. And I think that's culturally like a very important thing to recognize, is that you cannot judge people by where they're from, what their past includes in that way, in order to evaluate their ability to execute upon something well.
And I would say the same is for the disability community as well, because there's a very high rate of unemployment. So, people need to give people a chance.
Yeah. And, it's illegal to not hire people for any of these reasons. But then you get this other sort of pushback like, oh, this person is hired because I can't not hire them and so on. But I would say this. All of these considerations actually are much, much easier if you enrich yourself, if you expand yourself, if you are more curious, if you learn more, and then you don't have to look, because people are in your world, people that have different abilities and perspectives and so on are more readily available to collaborate with. But this is a wide systemic change that has to happen. And all we have to do is like have open hearts and open minds and talk about these things and not become defensive, protective, afraid, in order to broach these subjects. The main thing you can do is ask, and then you will learn.
Yeah. And you said it earlier, nothing about us without us. So if you're making something for the masses, then you need to make sure that you are including folks that you typically wouldn't in the process.
Do you want to offer any final thoughts, resources, breadcrumb trails before we close out?
Oh, well, thank you for having me be part of this event. I again encourage folks to join XR Access. The symposium is happening June 10th and 11th. And if you are not able to make the symposium, please look into joining one of the work groups. I would also encourage folks who are interested in knowing a little bit more about XR and accessibility to check out the W3C has XR accessibility user requirements that are really, if you're just trying to get an understanding of what accessibility means for the space, I think that's a good place to look. And, make the world a more accessible place for others and for your future self.
Fantastic. Again, thank you, Regine, for joining us. She's the author of Inclusive Design for a Digital World, Designing with Accessibility in Mind. It's available on Amazon and Apress books. I strongly recommend the read for every reason. And we really appreciate your time. It's been a pleasure meeting you, getting to know you, and having a lot of fun together. I hope you enjoy the show, and good luck with the show that you're going to be putting on just after.
Thank you.
Take care.
Thanks.